August 1969. As word spreads of a horrific killing rampage, Hollywood's gilded radiance turns to gloom. A crime so horrifying, so unimaginable, that it chilled the very soul of America. Some of the most violent crimes of the time would be committed by a group of young men and women who were led by a man named Charles Manson. In addition to taking lives, they destroyed families, dashed hopes, and left an indelible mark on the American psyche. This was not an accident. Rather, it was planned, calculated, and motivated by a man with a perverted vision. The targets? Prominent individuals and gullible Los Angeles citizens. The casualties? Including the actress Sharon Tate, innocent, adored. We will reveal the horror of the Manson family killings today. The promise of peace and love floated through the air in California. Los Angeles was an artistic haven, where Hollywood stars and ordinary people coexisted, believing they were safe from the world's evils. But as quickly as the world appeared to be changing, a dark undercurrent emerged, shattering the illusion of safety. By mid-August, California had been scarred by one of the most infamous crimes in American history, a brutal killing spree so twisted and haunting that it would forever alter the city, the country, and possibly the very fabric of the American dream. The dates were August 8th and 9th, 1969. Charles Manson's followers embarked on a violent mission, following the orders of a man they saw as a leader and prophet. What are their targets? Anyone Manson believed stood in the way of his delusional ambitions. Sharon Tate, 26, a rising star known for her beauty and grace, was one of the victims. Sharon was 8.5 months pregnant, with only a few weeks until she gave birth. She was hosting friends in her home that night, expecting nothing more than a typical evening of conversation and laughter. Instead, she, her unborn child, and her friends faced an unimaginable horror. Sharon Tate's friends, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, Wojciech Frykowski, a Polish filmmaker, Jay Sebring, a well-known Hollywood hairdresser, and Stephen Parent, a young visitor who had unknowingly entered Nightmare, would all fall victim to the violence. They were brutally murdered by members of what became known as the Manson family. These were not random murders. Charles Manson had orchestrated this targeted attack, using his strange charisma and twisted ideology to command a loyal group of young followers who were willing to go to any length to prove their devotion. This was not just a case of violence or theft. The crime was motivated by psychological manipulation and delusion. Manson's hold on his followers was absolute. He isolated them, shaped their beliefs, and persuaded them that he held the key to a new future, a future based on what he called helter-skelter, a term he borrowed from a Beatles song but twisted into his dark vision of a coming race war. What happened on those nights left a blood-stained reminder of terror, betrayal, and loss. Sharon Tate and her friends' deaths symbolized the loss of innocence at the heart of Hollywood, tearing open the curtain to reveal a dark underbelly of fear. The Manson family murders became one of the darkest and most psychologically disturbing cases in modern American history, and their actions went far beyond murder. It was the ultimate act of control by a power-hungry man, leaving behind shattered lives and an infamy legacy. The night of August 8, 1969 began as any other in Los Angeles. The air was warm, and a gentle breeze blew over the hills of Benedict Canyon. A small gathering had begun in the quiet neighborhood of 10050 Cielo Drive at the home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski. Polanski was away in Europe, leaving Sharon, who is 8 months pregnant, to host a peaceful evening for her closest friends. That night, she was joined by Jay Sebring, her ex-boyfriend and a well-known hairdresser, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and Abigail's boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski, a Polish writer and filmmaker. Inside, laughter and conversation permeated the atmosphere. Sharon and her friends were at ease, unaware of the dark presence closing in on them. Just outside the gates, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, Manson's followers, waited armed and ready. Each of them believed they were carrying out a twisted mission orchestrated by Charles Manson himself. They had been told that their actions would result in the chaotic revolution Manson dubbed Helter Skelter, and they were mentally prepared to obey his commands. The intruders entered the property around midnight, disabling the security measures. Tex Watson, the group's leader, moved with calculated intent, directing them toward the unsuspecting group inside. They entered without mercy. The peace of the house was shattered as chaos broke out. The once peaceful home was transformed into a terrifying scene, filled with screams and desperate pleas that were cut short by brutality. Sharon Tate, her unborn child, and her friends' lives were cut short in an unspeakable act of cruelty. By morning, the brutal scene would be revealed. The housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, was the first to witness the aftermath. She had no idea what a nightmare she was about to face when she arrived early on August 9th. She opened the door, stepping into a house filled with horror. The killers scrawled messages on the walls and smeared blood on them, creating an unsettling scene. Sharon Tate's and her friends' bodies were scattered throughout the house, creating an unusual scene for law enforcement. Sharon Tate, the once glowing actress and mother-to-be, was discovered lifeless, still hoping to welcome her child into the world. The brutality shocked even the most seasoned detectives who arrived on the scene. Neighbors, journalists, and onlookers would soon gather outside, trying to comprehend the extent of the violence inflicted on the victims. Word quickly spread, and the media descended on the house, covering every gruesome detail. The Polanski residence became an epicenter of horror overnight, casting a long-lasting shadow over the city. What no one knew was the magnitude of what was behind this murder. This was not a one-time crime, but rather the start of a series of coordinated attacks, all part of a plan based on madness and manipulation. The investigation that followed would reveal the true horror of the Manson family's intentions, exposing a dark plot that would become one of the most notorious chapters in American history. In the early hours of August 9, 1969, Los Angeles police arrived at the Polanski residence to find a scene unlike any they had seen before. The brutality was unimaginable. Evidence was strewn throughout the house, including bloody handprints, overturned furniture, and walls marked with chilling blood messages. Detectives knew they were dealing with a planned and deliberate act of violence, but they didn't know who was responsible or why. The investigation began immediately, and every moment would be critical in solving this heinous crime. As detectives interviewed neighbors and examined evidence, they began to piece together a picture of the horrific events that occurred. Blood tests, fingerprints, and tire tracks became crucial clues, but early leads were scarce. The brutal, seemingly ritualistic nature of the crime hinted at something more than a random act of violence. As the days turned into weeks, the case stalled, leaving Los Angeles on edge. However, the horrific nature of the murders did not end there. The next night on August 10, 1969, the same ruthless group struck again, killing Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in a similarly brutal manner. The killings appeared senseless, but connected, perplexing investigators and exacerbating the city's horror. As more details emerged, one chilling possibility emerged. The murders could be linked. Investigators soon suspected that the same perpetrators were behind both attacks. Detectives had no leads, though, because there was little physical evidence linking the scenes. The investigation appeared to be at a standstill until a break came from an unexpected source. Susan Atkins, one of the suspects, was arrested on unrelated charges. In her cell, she began bragging to another inmate about her role in the Tate and LaBianca murders. The confession was disturbing, full of graphic details, and confirmed what investigators had suspected. These killings were not isolated incidents. Atkins' confession led police to the Manson family, a group of young followers led by the enigmatic and disturbing Charles Manson. Manson, who had a criminal record and a long history of psychological manipulation, had a devoted following, including many impressionable young women looking for guidance and purpose. Manson saw himself as a prophet, and his followers believed everything he said. He preached about an impending apocalypse he dubbed Helter Skelter, convincing them that they had been chosen to bring about the race war. The power he wielded over his followers was terrifying. They were willing to kill at his command. The more the investigators discovered, the more disturbing the picture became. The key members of Manson's so-called family included Patricia Krenwinkel, who was later described as having shown no remorse, Leslie Van Houten, who participated in the LaBianca murders, and Tex Watson, who led the brutal attacks on the victims, carrying out Manson's plans with calculated viciousness. Each of these followers was once a normal young person who had been deeply influenced by Manson and manipulated to commit unspeakable acts in his name. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, detectives realized the full extent of Manson's influence. Manson's followers, mostly young women seeking acceptance and a sense of belonging at the Spahn Ranch, were psychologically broken down and rebuilt under his twisted ideology. They were given new identities, their histories erased, and subjected to Manson's erratic teachings on love, loyalty, and the impending apocalypse. In Manson's mind, he was preparing them for a revolution, and murder was just a means to that twisted end. The investigation finally came to a climax when authorities began arresting members of the Manson family one by one, piecing together the details of their involvement in the murders. The public was horrified to learn that these killings were carried out by ordinary young people who had been brainwashed and motivated by a single man's dark beliefs. Charles Manson was at the center of it all, a symbol of a corrupted mind whose influence was so strong that his followers became murderers. The psychological manipulation he employed was unprecedented, and the case became a sobering lesson in the perils of unchecked charisma and control. As the investigation focused on Manson and his followers, the police realized they had uncovered something far more than a murder case. They had discovered the terrifying reality of a cult in which followers were willing to die, even kill, for a man they saw as a messiah. The subsequent trial would reveal the full horror of the Manson family's actions, and the world would soon realize the scope of the darkness that had taken root in California that summer. During the early stages of the investigation, the police encountered a wall of confusion. They had virtually no leads. The brutality of the crime indicated a deliberate plan, but nothing concrete linked anyone to the scene. The media frenzy increased pressure, and the LAPD was determined to find answers. But just when it appeared they were at a dead end, the case took an unexpected turn. Rumors spread about strange behavior reported near Spahn Ranch, a secluded hideout on the outskirts of Los Angeles, where a group led by a man named Charles Manson had been spotted. Is it possible that this group was connected? Or was this simply another dead end? The first major twist occurred when detectives received a report from a nearby ranch about strange rituals, wild parties, and unsettling chants heard at night. Witnesses described a group of young people who appeared to be in a trance, repeating their leaders' every word. However, with no direct link to the murders, this lead appeared thin at best. In a desperate move, the police began questioning anyone with information about Spahn Ranch. The more they learned about this group and its leader, Charles Manson, the more bizarre the case became. But then a red herring threw the investigators off track completely. A tip was received claiming that the Tate LaBianca murders were the work of a rival group attempting to frame Manson's followers, or possibly a copycat killer. This claim was supported by scattered evidence that appeared too staged and perfect to be true. Detectives wondered if they were being led astray, distracted from the true killers by false leads. Another strange twist occurred in the form of a false confession. A local man, previously known to police for minor crimes, approached detectives and claimed responsibility for the murders. He described the scenes in unsettling detail, including enough factual information to make his story plausible. However, closer examination revealed inconsistencies. Investigators quickly discovered that this man had fabricated his involvement, taking advantage of the case's notoriety. And detectives were back at square one. Despite these dead ends, another lead soon emerged, which would prove critical. A witness reported seeing a strange message painted on the crime scene, which echoed what they had heard among Manson's followers. The words, "helter-skelter," were graffitied in blood. Just as Manson had warned his followers about an impending race war, he called the same name. This bizarre connection prompted detectives to delve deeper into Manson and his twisted ideology. Finally, a breakthrough occurred when an inmate at a nearby jail informed investigators about Susan Atkins, a Manson family member who had been arrested on unrelated charges. Atkins allegedly boasted to another inmate about the Tate murders, going so far as to describe the heinous acts she had committed, including Sharon Tate's brutal murder. This shocking confession was exactly what detectives had been looking for, a link between Manson's followers and the murders. With this confession, a clear path to resolving the case was opened. Aware of Manson's control over his followers, detectives began piecing together the grim story. They discovered that Manson had shaped his followers into a lethal force by instilling unspeakable loyalty in them through his twisted vision of an apocalyptic future. This revelation revealed the extent of his power, demonstrating that the murders were not random. They were the result of a carefully orchestrated plan carried out by a group under the spell of a single man. The Manson family murders were no longer just an act of violence. They had become a dark testament to the power of manipulation and control. Charles Manson had misled his followers into believing that murder was their fate, a means to achieve his chaotic vision. As the cops got closer, they realized the true horror. Manson's followers were not just loyal. They were willing to kill for him, believing they were doing something necessary and righteous. Each turn of the investigation revealed new layers of terror, eventually revealing the chilling heart of Manson's so-called family. To comprehend how Charles Manson could commit such heinous acts, we must first understand the man himself, a figure shaped by a life of hardship and resentment. Manson's childhood was marked by abandonment and instability. He was born to a teenage mother who served time in prison and frequently left him in the care of strangers. From a young age, he was placed in reform schools, foster homes, and eventually juvenile detention centers, setting him on a path of crime and manipulation. By the time Manson was an adult, he'd been in and out of prison more than he could remember. In prison, he found solace in music and began to learn the art of persuasion. He read books about psychology and hypnotism to learn how to manipulate others and exploit their weaknesses. When he was finally released in the late 1960s, he joined the San Francisco counterculture, quickly realizing that the peace and love movement had drawn young people looking for a purpose. Manson saw an opportunity. He could present himself as a figure of authority, a prophet, giving these lost souls a place to belong. Manson's charisma and psychological manipulation were unmistakable. He carefully selected emotionally vulnerable people, many of whom were young women who had fled troubled homes, feeling isolated and unworthy. He capitalized on their insecurities, reinforcing the notion that he was their only true family and that they owed him complete loyalty. To Manson's followers, he was more than just a leader. He was a messiah figure, claiming divine knowledge and an extra-dimensional mission. Manson used this lens to shape his followers, teaching them that society had failed them and that they had been chosen to be a part of a revolution. Among Manson's followers were Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Tex Watson, all key players in the murders. Susan Atkins, who had a difficult childhood filled with neglect and instability, fell quickly under Manson's spell. Manson gave her a new name, Sadie Mae Glutz, which symbolized her rebirth under his ideology. Atkins saw Manson as the father figure she had never had, and she was willing to do anything to get his approval, including murder. Patricia Krenwinkel, another key member of the group, came from a background of profound insecurity. She had struggled with her self-esteem, feeling out of place and unloved. Manson sensed her need for acceptance and welcomed her into his family, telling her she was beautiful, important, and chosen. Patricia became fiercely loyal under his guidance, willing to use violence to demonstrate her devotion. Manson's hold on her was so strong that she believed she was serving a greater purpose, that the brutal acts she committed were justified in the name of his vision. Tex Watson, on the other hand, was no vulnerable young woman, but rather a man who had once led a respectable life. He had been a high school football star in Texas, seemingly destined for a traditional future. However, after relocating to California, Watson was drawn into Manson's world, captivated by his magnetic personality and radical ideology. Manson persuaded Watson that he was destined for greatness as his right-hand man. Under Manson's control, Watson would lead the attacks, blindly following orders and carrying out Manson's dark plans with chilling efficiency. Manson's indoctrination program was relentless. He cut off his followers from the outside world, reinforcing the belief that they were the only ones who could see the truth. He bombarded them with ideas about helter-skelter, a race war he claimed was unavoidable, and convinced them that they had been chosen to spark this conflict. Manson's followers came to believe that the violence they committed was both justified and necessary. Manson used a combination of fear, love, and psychological manipulation to keep them loyal, ensuring that they would kill at his command without hesitation. This loyalty grew beyond simple obedience and became a form of fanaticism. Manson's followers saw murder as a sacred duty rather than a crime. They believed they were agents of change, soldiers in a revolution they didn't fully comprehend. Manson had such complete control over them that they abandoned their previous lives, families, and even their own identities. They were transformed into new people within the Manson family, bound by his twisted vision of the future. The psychological manipulation Manson used on his followers was a chilling testament to his power. He took their insecurities and need for belonging and turned them into weapons of destruction. They believed he possessed the answers to their lives, and that his vision was worth dying and killing for. Charles Manson's ability to control his followers transformed them into weapons, willing to commit unspeakable crimes in his name. This level of influence is uncommon and terrifying, a reminder of how easily people can be manipulated when they are lost, vulnerable, and looking for meaning. As the investigation progressed, detectives became frustrated, circling the same unanswered questions with little results. They were up against a wall, the brutality of the crimes making them desperate for any leads. But then, by chance, the breakthrough they had been hoping for arrived. This time from within the confines of a jail cell. Susan Atkins, one of Manson's devoted followers, was arrested on an unrelated charge. While awaiting trial, Atkins began speaking with a fellow inmate, recounting the Tate murders in chilling detail. She described the night of the killings with unsettling calm, describing each heinous act without hesitation. The inmate was horrified by what she heard and immediately notified authorities. Atkins' confession was more than a boast. It was a road map to the Manson family's atrocities, revealing the truth about what happened that night. Atkins' confession prompted police to look into the Manson family more closely. They discovered that Manson and his followers had been living at Spahn Ranch, a remote area on the outskirts of Los Angeles, where they had been cut off from the outside world. The ranch had served as their hideout, allowing Manson to preach his apocalyptic vision and further manipulate his followers. With this information, law enforcement could finally pursue a lead. They began gathering intelligence on the group, quickly discovering its disturbing nature and the unwavering loyalty Manson inspired. As the investigators dug deeper, they discovered a pattern of control and violence. They discovered witnesses who had seen Manson's followers performing strange rituals, carrying knives, and discussing Manson's prophecies of helter-skelter. The police were finally beginning to see the link between the cult's twisted ideology and the horrific murders. With enough evidence in hand, they planned to make their move, hoping to put an end to the terror that had gripped Los Angeles. In October 1969, police raided the Spahn Ranch. They arrived early in the morning and surrounded the compound. The Manson family was caught off guard, with many of them sleeping as officers moved in. Charles Manson was arrested, along with several of his followers, and the long-awaited truth about their crimes was beginning to emerge. But even while in custody, Manson remained defiant, his eyes blazing with righteousness, as if he were untouchable. Following Manson's arrest, police determined the full extent of his influence over his followers. More confessions emerged, each revealing details known only to those present at the murders. Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Tex Watson all described how Manson persuaded them that killing was their duty, as part of the revolution he had promised. Their statements painted a chilling picture of a man in complete control, transforming his followers into tools for his distorted vision. The revelation of the Manson family's involvement sent shockwaves across the country. As the confessions progressed, details emerged that were almost too horrific to believe. Manson not only directed his followers to kill, but he also instilled in them the belief that they were carrying out a grand, cosmic plan. He had persuaded them that their actions were justified, that they were necessary steps toward triggering helter-skelter, his prophecy of an impending race war. The extent of Manson's manipulation was staggering, a reminder of his terrifying power over those he commanded. Manson continued to manipulate in the days after his arrest, using his charisma even while in custody. During questioning, he avoided direct answers, instead speaking in riddles and remaining defiant. His followers mirrored his attitude, displaying an unsettling lack of remorse. For Manson, this was the pinnacle of power, a final act of control before confronting the justice system. Finally, the puzzle was completed. Detectives had gathered sufficient evidence to charge Manson and several of his followers with the murders of Sharon Tate, her friends, and the LaBianca family. The upcoming trial would reveal the darkest depths of Manson's influence and the extent of his control over his followers, leaving a legacy that would forever haunt the American psyche. Manson's reign of terror had ended, but the scars left behind would be permanent, a reminder of the dangers of manipulation, charisma, and the darkness that can lurk within. In 1971, nearly 2 years after the brutal murders, Charles Manson and his followers were finally tried. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' families, and curious onlookers. This was more than just a criminal case. It was a national spectacle, one of the most infamous trials in American history. Every word, every detail, was scrutinized and reported on by the public, who were looking for answers to the horror that had occurred. Throughout the trial, Manson's power over his followers was on full display. They demonstrated a disturbing level of devotion, frequently chanting Manson's slogans, carving excess into their foreheads, and mimicking his every move. Manson himself continued to play the role of the manipulator, frequently grinning at the cameras, unsettling both the jury and the public. His followers, including Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, testified to their faith in Manson's vision, revealing the extent of his power and the twisted reality he had created for them. The trial exposed gruesome details that shocked the nation. Witnesses described Manson orchestrating each murder, instructing his followers to leave signs at the crime scenes, and believing that the murders would spark the race war he dubbed helter-skelter. The jury heard accounts of Manson's psychological manipulation and his ability to turn ordinary young people into murderers. Charles Manson and his followers were found guilty of first-degree murder in January 1971, following months of testimony. Manson and his followers were sentenced to death and faced execution. However, in 1972, California abolished the death penalty and commuted the sentences to life in prison. The announcement of their life sentences divided public opinion. Many people believed that death was the only appropriate punishment for such heinous crimes, whereas others saw life sentences as an opportunity for society to examine and comprehend the depths of manipulation and mental control that had driven these murders. The Manson family's sentencing marked the end of a chapter, But the victims' families' pain would never go away. The impact of the Manson family murders extended far beyond the courtroom. For the victims' families, the tragedy created an unimaginable void. Sharon Tate's family, in particular, was devastated by the death. Doris Tate, her mother, went on to become a well-known advocate for victims' rights, dedicating her life to ensuring that other families did not have to go through the same ordeal. Her tireless efforts paved the way for California's victims' rights legislation, forever altering the justice system's approach to victim advocacy. The Manson murders also left a mark on Hollywood and the country as a whole. The public's perception of cults, counterculture, and psychological manipulation shifted dramatically. The crime shattered the idyllic image of 1960s Los Angeles, making it a symbol of lost innocence. People became wary of charismatic leaders and alternative lifestyles, fearing the dangers that might lurk beneath. The era of peace and love had passed, replaced by a haunting awareness of the darkness that could emerge even in the most unexpected places. Manson would continue to be a disturbing figure in American culture, his influence lasting even after he was imprisoned. Over the years, he gave interviews, frequently speaking in cryptic, unsettling terms, as a reminder of his hold on the public imagination. However, as time passed, the true legacy of the case became a lesson in the dangers of unchecked charisma and the vulnerability of those seeking meaning. Charles Manson's reign of terror may have ended with his arrest, but the warning his story contained remained relevant, a dark reminder of the cost of manipulation and how easily minds can be twisted to serve a darker purpose. The story of Charles Manson and his followers is a chilling example of manipulation, loyalty, and violence. But it also raises questions that remain long after the case is over. What really drove Charles Manson and his followers to murder? Was this simply a case of a man preying on vulnerable people, or was there something deeper going on? Some believe Manson's actions stemmed from his own desire for power and control, while others question whether he truly believed in the chaotic, helter-skelter vision he preached. Was he just a master manipulator? Or did he also believe in the dark fantasies he used to justify his crimes? According to one theory, Manson was more than a cult leader. He was a man driven by a sociopathic desire to dominate and manipulate. This theory contends that Helter Skelter was merely a ruse, a story he invented to justify his actions and ensure the loyalty of his followers. According to this viewpoint, Manson's true motivation was power, and he used psychological manipulation techniques to transform ordinary people into murderers. Is it possible that he saw himself as more than a leader? Could he have believed he was a prophet destined to start a revolution? Another question that hangs over this case is the role of his followers. Were they completely under Manson's control, or did they take responsibility for themselves? Some argue that Manson's followers were victims in their own right, young people who were misled, manipulated, and eventually brainwashed into believing Manson's dark vision. Others believe the followers were motivated by their own desires, and that their association with Manson provided them with a twisted sense of purpose or power. What are your thoughts? Were Manson's followers entirely to blame, or were they trapped by a spell they couldn't break? There is also the issue of Manson's psychological profile. Many experts believe Manson exhibited traits of both a sociopath and a psychopath, with his charm and cunning concealing a complete lack of empathy. His ability to completely manipulate people suggests that he has a thorough understanding of psychology. Some speculate that he learned these skills while in prison, where he studied hypnosis, psychology, and persuasion techniques. But did he act solely to maintain control, or was he truly a man with an apocalyptic vision? What are your thoughts? Then there's the theory that Manson was obsessed with fame and recognition. Some believe that his plan extended beyond his followers and even included the prospect of a race war. They argue that Manson, who once aspired to be a musician, was motivated by a desire to leave his mark on the world. When his music career failed, he may have seen the murders as a way to gain notoriety, even if it was through infamy. Could this entire story be about a man desperate for recognition who decided that if he couldn't be a star, he'd rather be a symbol of terror? As we discuss this case, I'd like to hear from you. What do you believe really motivated Charles Manson and his followers? Was it pure manipulation, a desire for power, or a misguided belief in his own twisted vision? Please leave a comment below with your thoughts. And what about his followers? Do you believe they bear equal responsibility, or were they manipulated beyond reason? Share your theories, and we'll talk about the complex psychology behind one of history's most infamous cases. The story of Charles Manson and his followers remains as chilling today as it was in 1969. It's a case that calls into question not only Manson's own actions, but also the power of influence, loyalty, and the vulnerability of those seeking meaning in a chaotic world. What truly drove Manson and his followers to commit such heinous crimes? Was it a collective delusion, Manson's desire for power, or a quest for infamy? What about his followers? Were they completely under his control, or do they bear their own responsibility? Some believe Manson's true motivation was a desire for power, and that helter-skelter was simply a cover, a story he used to manipulate his followers. Others believe Manson truly saw himself as a prophet and believed his own twisted visions. And how about his followers? Were they the victims of psychological manipulation, or did they discover a dark purpose within the cult that they were more than willing to embrace? We would love to hear from you. What do you believe was the true cause of the Manson family murders? Do you think Manson's followers were completely under his control, or did they share some of the blame? Was this simply the result of one man's manipulation, or was it something more? Share your theories in the comments, and let's talk about one of the most disturbing true crime cases in history. We appreciate you joining us on this journey through the dark legacy of the Manson family murders. If you found this case as thought-provoking and disturbing as we did, please like, comment, and subscribe to encourage more in-depth investigations into the psychology of true crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember that the most compelling stories are frequently the most unsettling.